Hansol No was a young man who used to work part-time at a restaurant. One day, the restaurant manager confronted him, questioning why he wouldn't listen to instructions. The manager, clearly agitated, accused Hansol of acting suspiciously, even suggesting that perhaps the FDA had bribed him to report issues about the restaurant. Holding a plate of food, the manager pointed to it and demanded to know whether it looked eaten. He insisted that the food was as good as new and argued that no one would be able to tell the difference. He emphasized how expensive the dish was and angrily asked Hansol how he could suggest throwing it out. The manager then went on, expressing frustration at having to constantly lecture Hansol, accusing him of being another burden in addition to the restaurant's already declining sales. He remarked bitterly that he had chosen Hansol because he looked decent and normal, but now saw him as completely useless. In response, Hansol told the manager that all he ever did was reuse leftovers, and that he shouldn't be surprised the business was failing. He pointed out the hypocrisy of blaming employees for the inevitable downfall. The manager, now furious, demanded to know what Hansol was talking about. Hansol calmly replied that refusing to serve rejected food wasn't going to revive the business and added sarcastically how petty the manager was for thinking so. He told him that if he was that upset, he might as well fire him, asserting that everything he said had been the truth. Eventually, Hansol was fired. As he walked out of the restaurant, he kept thinking that he hadn't done anything wrong yet. He always ended up in these situations. It was always the same pattern. His temper would flare up, take control of him, and later, he would be left with nothing but regret. He thought to himself that maybe he should have made sure the rent was covered before quitting the job. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he checked his balance and only $150 remained. He realized this was far from enough to cover the month's rent. And with his odd personality, he had no friends or relatives from whom he could borrow money. He concluded that there was only one solution left: contacting the landlord. Dialing her number, he introduced himself as Hansol No and mentioned the issue about the rent. She instructed him to meet her at their usual place. Hansol arrived at the landlord's apartment, and the first thing they did was a late-night yoga session, something they had made into a routine. He often conducted cardio sessions for her. During the session, the landlord reminded him that he had to teach her properly if he wanted to receive his allowance. She warned him that unless he put effort into it, he might end up kicked out into the cold. Although she disliked having to push him before he acted, she acknowledged his dedication to the training and decided to let him off the hook for the rent that month. Still, she questioned why he couldn't even hold down a part-time job. She brought up the recent incident where he got fired for refusing to ignore spoiled food, calling him a goody two-shoes, and asking why it was so hard for him to just stay quiet. She said that if she were in his shoes, she would find it harder to endure being broke and unable to pay rent every month than to look the other way for once. Hansol protested, asking whether he couldn't speak up when something was clearly wrong. The landlord told him that no one was stopping him from making a fuss, but if he was so confident about standing up for what was right, he should have considered the consequences of getting fired. Hansol muttered that restaurants like that deserved to go out of business anyway. She told him that he could only say such things because he had nothing to be responsible for, calling him a child who couldn't even manage his own life. According to her, there was no point in listening to someone who couldn't handle their responsibilities. She told him that a grown adult who couldn't even pay rent had no right to talk about justice or slack off in the name of it. He needed to grow up, take responsibility, and act like an adult if he wanted to be treated like one. She asked him how long he intended to behave like a little boy. Hansol replied with a sigh, complaining that she was nagging him like his mother. She smirked and said that wasn't something she expected to hear from someone who just gave her double workout sessions. She asked if he had just called her his mom, then burst out laughing. Hansol rolled his eyes and told her to forget it, suggesting they do one more round of yoga. When he asked what she meant, she looked at him and ordered him to follow her instructions, noting that she could still see his dumbbells lying around. He explained that he had put them away because he thought they were done for the night. He added that if someone else saw them together, they might assume she was the one paying him. Hansol reflected on how he always felt a certain way around the landlord. Though she rarely showed it, she was truly a mature woman who liked to involve herself in his life. Half joking, he told her that she should use some of her power to properly train him in yoga. He added sarcastically that she was hurting his pride and asked if she really needed to lecture him about getting a job when he was already teaching her sessions. He wondered aloud why she couldn't be kinder to him. Meanwhile, Subin Lee, a girl who lived in the upper portion of the same building owned by the landlord, was busy working in her room on her computer. Frustrated, she muttered angrily about her professor, wishing he would just disappear. She was clearly overwhelmed and on the verge of losing her mind. She couldn't understand how a woman who had worked for years in a graduate school office still didn't know the basics of Excel. Subin resolved that before she graduated, she would confront this woman and make her life difficult. While still fuming, Subin suddenly heard noise coming from above. She sighed in irritation, realizing it was the landlord and that boy, Han Sol, doing their workout again loud as always, even at this late hour. She grumbled that she couldn't take it anymore and decided she had to go and stop them, as they were disturbing her concentration and peace. Subin, visibly irritated, stood up from her desk and headed upstairs to the landlord's apartment. As she climbed the steps, she muttered that she lived downstairs and could clearly hear the noise. She knew they were inside, and complained loudly at their door, saying they were being unreasonably loud. Inside the apartment, Han Sol heard her voice and admitted that maybe they shouldn't have been doing yoga at this hour. The landlord, Hyen Jusung, waved off the concern and told him to ignore the girl, claiming that she always found something to complain about. Han Sol, however, noticed that the doorbell kept ringing persistently and decided to go out and talk to her. He assured Hyen he would be right back after a quick word. But Hyen tried to stop him. She pleaded with him to stay and finish the training session, insisting that he needed to listen to her. Meanwhile, Subin remained standing outside the door. Inside, Han Sol told Hyen again that he would just step out briefly to have a word with her. Hyen, sounding exasperated, questioned why he cared so much when she was the actual owner of the house. Han Sol replied that, despite that, they weren't exactly innocent in the matter either. He stepped outside, apologizing for disturbing the night. He explained that he had just been finishing up some work when he opened the door. But to his surprise, no one was there. Instead, he saw a number of posters plastered all over the walls. The posters were angrily worded and specifically targeted Room 401. They read, "Room 401, you people are monsters. I've told you last month and the month before that and multiple times in between to stop having your health sessions. I don't know if you're ignoring me or just don't care. I'm begging you, please stop. This has been going on for ages. I'm not even asking for forever, just take a break for a day or two. You're disturbing me." Han Sol was stunned as he saw how many posters there were. They were everywhere, plastered on the door, scattered along the walls, and even lining the stairwell. Shocked, he muttered to himself how excessive it all was and began tearing them down. He grumbled that Subin must be crazy to go this far, wondering how far she had gone to post them all. As he was pulling the posters down, Hyen stepped outside and scolded him. She asked why he was taking them down, accusing him of overstepping his boundaries. She reminded him again that the girl downstairs was sensitive and had been acting more irrational than usual lately. Hyen sarcastically asked what he intended to do about it now, labeling him an overstepper. Han Sol, confused, asked what she meant by that. Hyen sighed and began complaining that the situation wasn't fair. She pointed out that they were simply working out in their own home while resolving a rent issue. It was her house, bought with her own money. She questioned whether she was supposed to stop her activities just because someone told her to. Without waiting for a response, she then began stretching and resumed her yoga session right there in the hallway. Han Sol stared at her in disbelief, asking how she could possibly do this outside their room in full view, but she seemed unfazed. She casually explained that she had been thinking about something lately and decided it was time he started managing the villa. She admitted she was growing tired of handling everything herself and figured Han Sol might be suited to the job, since he liked meddling in matters anyway. She offered him a deal: manage the property and receive $4,000 per month, along with continuing to teach her yoga sessions occasionally just like today. Just at that moment, Subin Lee arrived upstairs and spotted the two of them together. Hyen had ordered Han Sol in a firm voice, telling him that if he wanted to live there and get paid, he would have to do at least this much cleaning the entire floor. Without waiting for a response, she walked away, leaving him to handle the mess. Han Sol stood still for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. He thought to himself that he had finally done something he never had the courage to do before. Since people were usually around, he had always avoided it, but now he felt he should quietly clean up and head back inside. He moved to switch on the hallway light, muttering in confusion about whether the sensor light had broken since it wasn't turning on. But as the light suddenly flashed on, he was startled to see Subin sitting right in front of him in the dark. His body tensed at the unexpected sight. As soon as he spotted her, he turned and rushed downstairs toward her apartment. Reaching her floor, he called out, asking where she was going. He noticed that all of her posters were scattered around again. Subin had gone back into her apartment, surrounded by the same posters. She sat silently, thinking to herself that she had made direct eye contact with that man. Everything she had done was supposed to catch the landlord's attention and show her just how big of a deal it was to host a jumping session outside like that. She couldn't believe how it had turned into a public spectacle, like advertising their yoga sessions to the entire world. She trembled as she looked at the posters, worriedly wondering what she had done. The next morning, Hansol and Hyen sat at the table having breakfast. During the meal, he cautiously brought up the subject, asking why she had put him in charge. Hyen, with an amused smirk, responded ironically by asking what it was now. Son. Hansol sighed at her tone. He clarified that he didn't have anything against her calling him, that it just made him curious as to why she would assign him such a role. Hyen casually explained that she brought him in because he was good at teaching resistance band sessions. Later, as Hansol stood at the sink washing dishes, he continued to wonder if there was any other reason. Hyen remarked that the place was quite a hassle to maintain and mentioned that all the people living downstairs had a lot of issues. Hansol suspected she was referring to the girl he had seen the night before. He figured Subin had probably seen and heard everything that had happened outside. Then Hyen confirmed his suspicion. She told him that Subin was a strange girl, so strange, in fact, that even the other tenants had started complaining about her. She declared that from now on, Hansol would be responsible for handling her. That included hosting training sessions and helping out a jobless person, which she framed as a perfect example of mutual dependence. Hansol asked just how bad the complaints were. Hyen replied that he had witnessed it himself the previous night, how she reacted the moment something annoyed her. She said Subin had a tendency to get right in people's faces and had long since crossed the line with her hysteria. Before leaving, Hyen added that there was something else but quickly retracted, saying he didn't need to worry about it unless he actually ran into Subin again. Just in case, she advised him to take care of his body properly. Hansol pressed her to tell him what it was, but she brushed it off, assuring him that as long as he did what he was supposed to, there would be no problems. A while later, she walked toward her car. Hansol stood outside and waved her goodbye. She turned back and reminded him that he better not forget what he needed to do. He would get paid, but only if he worked hard and proved he was worth the money. She encouraged him to relax his face, telling him not to make her regret her decision, and that she was counting on him. Hansol replied with a simple okay, and walked back into the building. As he entered, he thought to himself that even if he relaxed his expression, it didn't change the fact that he had completely ignored a noise complaint and had proceeded with the yoga session. He wondered how someone could properly manage such a chaotic situation. Trying to push the thought away, he decided to start by removing all the handwritten posters from the walls. As he headed upstairs, he suddenly noticed that Subin was already there, quietly removing the posters herself. Their eyes met. Hansol hesitated before breaking the silence. He asked her if she was the one who had rung the doorbell the previous night. He acknowledged that they had indeed been quite loud due to certain circumstances and assured her that they would be more careful moving forward. But Subin narrowed her eyes and asked what those circumstances were. Hansol let out an awkward laugh, thinking to himself that her facial expressions revealed everything. He then realized she was already taking the posters down herself and offered to take care of the rest. He told her that if she gave him the ones she had already taken down, he'd throw them out for her. However, her expression grew increasingly cold and angry. She retorted that she didn't need help from someone like him. She pointed out that the posters were meant to convey exactly what she couldn't say out loud, that both he and the landlady had been too loud the night before, and the kind of noise they had made wasn't even something she could describe to others. She declared that she hadn't expected help from someone like him and demanded that he stay quiet. She added, with a cutting tone, That word around the building was he was just some guy getting pocket money in exchange for private training. She questioned what made someone like him act so high and mighty when he was just a man living off a cushy arrangement. Hansel's irritation simmered. He thought to himself that this was exactly why he avoided lowering his guard, because if he apologized first, people would see him as a pushover. He also found it ironic that she, who littered the walls with things she couldn't even say directly, was lecturing him. Then he remembered Hyen's words that you know what you need to do to earn that money, right? Back in the moment, he composed himself and told Subin that he would head up first and that she could continue what she was doing. He advised her that next time, if she had something to say, she should come speak to him in person instead of putting posters all over the walls. He added that starting today, he was officially the building manager. Hansol calmly added that he would also be posting his contact information on the corridor wall later, so that tenants could easily reach him if needed. Subin had been listening quietly until that moment. Suddenly, her face flushed with heat and frustration. With a serious tone and a sharp, "Excuse me," she stepped forward and handed over a bundle of posters to him. She asked him to help her by throwing those away, admitting that she hadn't realized how many there actually were. Her voice softened slightly as she continued, saying that including what she had said earlier and what was written on those posters, it seemed she had been quite impulsive. She insisted she would take the rest down herself and just needed him to dispose of that batch. Hansol nodded and agreed, taking the posters from her hands. Inwardly, he wondered what had suddenly changed in her demeanor. It surprised him that she was leaving that part to him so willingly. Still, she seemed more emotionally sensitive than he had assumed before. He found himself questioning whether all he needed to do was respond gently in return. After a short pause, he looked at her and reminded her again to feel free to contact him in the future if she ever needed assistance. Subin glanced at him, her expression flickering between tension and hesitation. Then, without warning, she blurted out another "excuse me," but this time, her tone was heated and conflicted. She looked him in the eye and asked, almost challengingly, how much she would have to pay if she wanted to have a yoga session with him. Those unexpected words echoed in Hansel's mind, repeating themselves again and again, looping in his thoughts as he stood there silently, trying to process what had just happened. Hansol was caught off guard, wondering to himself what had prompted Subin to suddenly say such a thing. He asked her seriously whether she truly thought he wasn't a yoga trainer. To him, the questions seemed completely absurd. He began questioning if her line of thought stemmed from the incident the previous day, assuming that their talk about yoga and money had somehow led her to form these strange assumptions. Frustrated, he also pointed out how bold she was for asking such things so directly to his face. He began wondering if she was always like this, blurting out whatever was on her mind and simply brushing it off afterward. Feeling too irritated to continue, he decided to pretend he hadn't heard any of it and turned around to walk away. Subin, on the other hand, remained standing there, unmoving. Her mind started spinning with thoughts, asking herself whether she had done something wrong by saying that. She knew he was the man who gave yoga lessons, but now she wasn't sure if she had crossed a line. Later, Hyen noticed something off about Hansol and asked him why he seemed to be in a worse mood than he had been earlier that morning. Hansol admitted that he had seen the girl who lived in Unit 301 that day. Hyen responded with a casual acknowledgement, prompting Hansol to explain further. He admitted that just the idea of having to keep running into her was already giving him a headache. When Hyen asked how the encounter had gone, Hansol explained that it had been a very brief one, so there hadn't been much said between them. Still, Hyen probed further, asking whether it was possible to tell something significant even from a short interaction. Hansol, now slightly confused, asked what she meant. Hyen clarified by asking whether he had figured out if he would want to have a gaming experience with her or not. Hansol scoffed, claiming that no matter what topic came up with her, it always ended in a conversation that left him feeling emotionally burnt out. He asked if such things were even important. Hyen insisted that they were exactly why she had hired him in the first place. In a defensive tone, Hansol responded that he couldn't even begin to consider having a cardio session with someone who said things so bluntly and without any filter. Hyen, amused, pointed out that his issue didn't seem to be with her appearance. Hansol was taken aback, wondering why she was bringing that up. She then smirked and reminded him of all the celebrity photos in his phone's album, filled with sweet, innocent-looking girls with long, straight hair just like Subin. Embarrassed, Hansol asked when she had seen those. Hyen dismissed the question and pressed on, asking what Subin had said that had upset him so much. Hansol hesitated, explaining that if he told her, it would only upset her too. Hyen said that his vague response only made her more curious. She reminded him that making a good impression was important if he wanted to make money. Hansol immediately responded that he had already asked her not to bring that up again. Hyen just stared at him knowingly and commented that he seemed like someone who had a lot on his mind. Hansol fell silent as thoughts swirled within him once again. He recognized that he and Hyen Jusung were people who had met only because of the game they were playing. Their roles as landlord and building manager were merely a front. As someone who couldn't even take responsibility for his own life, he told himself that he should at least be grateful that this relationship, however strange, was still intact. He began remembering Subin's earlier words, the way she had said she wanted to learn how to work out and had asked how much she would have to pay him. Despite angrily telling her not to refer to him as a teacher, Hansol knew that his current situation directly contradicted that sentiment. Those depressing thoughts clung to his mind like a cloud, refusing to go away. Eventually, he opened up to Hyen again, explaining that he had run into Subin while coming upstairs after cleaning the hallway. She had already been taking down the posters, so he thought he might help her out. But something must have triggered her, because she suddenly became rude. He described her as one of those people who always seemed to react aggressively whenever you encountered them. Hyen commented sarcastically that she was probably one of those individuals who lived their lives online, documenting every detail and printing out their personal stories to share with the world. Meanwhile, Subin lay on her bed, staring at her phone. Suddenly, she began mumbling to herself, admitting that everything was her fault. She confessed that Hansol was exactly her type, and because of that, she had gone all hard-eyed and started speaking nonsense talking about cardio and training. She now couldn't understand what had possessed her to say such embarrassing things. The shame overwhelmed her as she thought about the possibility of running into him again. She told herself that she had already moved past the stage of mere embarrassment. The only viable solution, she thought, was to move out. But even that wasn't possible. There was nowhere else to go. Cursing herself as a crazy girl, she stood up, stepped out of her apartment, and began walking upstairs. She tried to prepare herself, thinking that she needed to apologize first. Suffering in silence wasn't going to solve anything. But then came the difficult question: what exactly should she say? Should she apologize for saying something unnecessary? Should she admit that she thought he was a yoga trainer? She realized even that sounded weird. She knew she wanted to express regret, but not in a way that placed all the blame solely on herself. After all, he wasn't completely innocent either. Her frustration grew. She told herself that if it hadn't been for those two making so much noise in the first place, or if it weren't for her current circumstances, none of this would have happened. She wouldn't even need to worry about any of it. Back inside the apartment, Hansol was busy doing a resistance band session with Hyen. He reminded her that they didn't want to trigger the downstairs neighbor again. Hyen replied that it didn't bother her anymore. This was her house, and she could do what she wanted. Hansol countered that he cared because he was now the building manager, or at least he needed to act like one. Hyen teasingly asked if he was now trying to protect his image to earn brownie points from a girl who had already rejected him after their first meeting. Hansol defensively replied that something like that could happen to anyone. Hyen gave him a knowing look and asked why he was staring at her like that, jokingly asking what she was going to do with her son. Hansol laughed and asked if she planned to keep up this mom roleplay. Hyen went along with the joke and said her son should go inside now. Meanwhile, Subin had reached the apartment and was peeking through the slightly open door. She noticed that the landlady was home and that the door wasn't fully shut. She looked inside and thought in disbelief that they were actually doing yoga with the door wide open. She found the idea outrageous. Even though she sometimes lost her temper, she told herself that hearing something like that would only be possible if someone pressed their ear right up to the door. Still, the mere possibility that they might be practicing yoga so openly left her completely stunned. Subin was also thinking to herself that even if the landlady overheard something, it would only happen if she pressed her ear right against the door. As she continued to peek inside, she suddenly heard Hyen mentioning that Subin was pretty, and also something about balloons. Hansol, clearly confused by the comment, was wondering what that had to do with him. At that very moment, both Hansol and Hyen noticed Subin standing just outside. Hyen pointed out that Subin could hear them and started laughing, pretending to be surprised, acting as if she hadn't seen her standing there. Hyen kept pretending it was no big deal and added, in a slightly mocking tone, that if Subin had that kind of personality, she should at least be aware of it, because guys usually didn't like that kind of behavior. Subin listened to the entire conversation, her emotions stirring. She was silently fuming, thinking to herself that he had bought her attention, and she was determined to get him to teach her the gaming experience, no matter what it took. Suddenly, the door opened. Hansol stepped outside, his expression full of confusion as he caught sight of Subin standing there. He looked at her for a moment, puzzled, and asked what Unit 301 was doing there and what had brought her to that spot. Subin started running away from that place toward her apartment. Hansol stood there for a moment and called out to her, asking her to wait. Subin rushed toward her room, looking extremely flustered and stumbling along the way. Her mind was in chaos, and she kept thinking to herself, questioning what she had just done. As she hurried downstairs, she muttered that she was just going home and needed to get there quickly. While she was running, Hansol suddenly grabbed her hand, causing her to stop in place. He confronted her, asking why she kept knocking on their door and what she was doing in front of it this time. He wanted to know if she had been peeking. Subin, visibly confused, replied with hesitation, saying it was nothing. Hansol looked at her, wondering what was going on, urging her to speak up if she had something to say. He noticed how nervous she appeared, trembling without a word. Just then, a voice called from upstairs. Hyen was yelling at Hansol, telling him to put on proper clothes before going outside or to come back inside immediately. Hansol responded that he would head up. Then he turned back to Subin and said that whatever it was she had to say, she needed to stop making it so hard for herself to even utter a single word. He told her to stop the strange behavior and to just speak to him directly if she had something to say. He warned that he wouldn't let her off the hook next time if she tried to run away again. With that, he walked off, leaving Subin standing there, lost in thought, thinking that this boy had thick and long hands and that the landlady always seemed to enjoy working out with him. When Hansol entered the room, Hyen asked him if he had gone outside dressed like that. He explained that he had no other choice since the door had suddenly closed. He hadn't expected anyone to be outside, but somehow the door had opened. Hyen suggested that maybe someone had forgotten to close it properly. She assumed it had been the girl from Unit 301 and asked how it felt to catch the offender in the act. Hansol replied that calling her an offender was a bit extreme, as it wasn't a big deal. She hadn't said a word even when caught, and it was as if she wasn't even the same person. He wasn't sure, but it was a relief for both of them this time. Still, as the building manager, he admitted to feeling concerned about running into her again. Hyen acknowledged his sense of responsibility but reminded him that the managerial title was somewhat superficial. She hadn't called him there to manage things perfectly. She only wanted to keep him close so she could comfortably enjoy her hobby. She added that she wouldn't stop him if he truly wanted to take the responsibilities seriously, but said the title of nice son suited him better. Didn't he agree? Then, shifting topics, she suggested doing a late-night yoga session and mentioned that they were going out the next day since it was her day off. Meanwhile, Subin lay on her bed, thinking that the landlady had likely left the door open on purpose just to provoke a reaction. On the other side, Hyen was in her room, talking on the phone. She was saying that what the person on the other end was claiming now was completely different from what had been promised before. The promise to respect her decision as long as she was working had been broken. She admitted that it was her fault for believing what had been said and addressed the caller as Dad. She told him not to apologize, that she didn't want to hear it, and that he shouldn't bother making promises anymore. Then she hung up the call while walking with her father. During this time, Hansol came out of the room and saw her. Hyen greeted him with surprise, saying he was up early since it was already 10 o'clock. She reminded him that they were supposed to head out after lunch. However, she then said that the plan was cancelled, as she wouldn't be back for a few days and asked him to take care of the place while she was gone. When Hansol asked her the reason, she said it was work. They were pestering her to come, so she had no choice. It was urgent and she asked him to help with her laundry. Hansol protested, telling her not to toss the clothes inside out like she was shedding skin. Hyen repeated what she had said the day before, reminding him once again that staying there nicely was the most important thing. She instructed him not to stir things up and just to stay quiet. She assured him that she'd be back as soon as her work was done. After packing, she got into the car and drove away. Han-sol stood there, watching her leave, thinking about what she had said. She had told him not to stir things up and to stay quiet, as if he were a child who needed to be disciplined. Maybe he really was a child to that person, which explained why she spoke to him that way so often. His employer was telling him to simply do as he was told, a comfortable and stable job with minimal responsibilities. Having someone like that nearby could be considered a blessing. But at the same time, getting fired the moment he opened his mouth when something upset him at his part-time jobs had become too familiar. Maybe he was just tired of living that way now, because being told not to stir things up and to stay quiet no longer sounded so harmless. He wondered whether he could continue to live like that. As he walked upstairs, he saw Subin standing in the hallway. She addressed him, asking him to listen to her, and remarked what a coincidence it was, saying she had been on her way down. Han-sol responded with a neutral tone. Subin hesitated, visibly nervous, and commented on how strange it was that they had met this way by coincidence. She explained that she had just been on her way to the supermarket nearby. Han-sol, however, told her it looked like she was just trying to brush off what had happened the day before. He insisted that they go over everything that had occurred, one by one. He asked why she had done what she did, why she was still doing it, and what exactly she wanted from him. He reminded her that he had told her he wouldn't let her off the hook next time. Subin stood there trembling and shivering, finally managing to say that if it was okay with him. Then he looked surprised and asked her if it was okay if they talked inside his house. Both of them entered her apartment. As Han-sol stepped inside, he observed his surroundings, thinking that this was what the other rooms looked like. Compared to Unit 401 where he currently stayed, it felt narrower, yet it was still more spacious than the place he used to live in. He found it surprisingly well-managed and tidy. Contrary to the assumptions he had about how internet people lived, it wasn't filthy at all, it was actually quite clean and organized. As he passed by the kitchen, his eyes caught a trash bag placed under the sink. He quietly wondered why it was there. Wasn't it supposed to stay outside? Subin glanced at him as if wanting to say something, prompting him to ask what it was. She softly asked if he wanted to sit. Han-sol declined, saying he was fine standing. But she insisted, mentioning that the conversation they were about to have might be long, so it might be better to sit somewhere more comfortable. He responded somewhat dryly, uncertain about how long it would really take, and added that all she needed to do was apologize for something that wouldn't take much time. Subin, however, said that she had more to say besides just an apology. He asked her what it was, but told her to start with the apology anyway and to promise never to behave so strangely in front of someone else's home again. Despite her irritation, she managed to control her expression and apologized. Han-sol nodded, thinking that it was good she chose to begin with that. He then asked her what she really wanted to say, warning that if it was something trivial like asking how much he charged per yoga session, he would leave. Subin immediately clarified that it wasn't anything like that. She explained that while she did say something inappropriate the last time they met, what she truly wanted to tell him was that she might be into him not in a creepy or obsessive way, but in a rather innocent manner. Then, with some hesitation, she asked what kind of relationship he had with the landlady. Han-sol fell into a flashback from 3 years ago. Back then, Hyen had greeted him, saying he must be the one his sister had spoken about. He remembered how desperate he had been, quitting all his part-time jobs, broke, and desperately searching through real estate agencies to find a decent place to live. Hyen had made a rather blunt remark about how he looked like someone who would end up on the street. Although it was unpleasant, it wasn't entirely false. Han-sol had brushed off how his sister had introduced him and simply asked if there were any available rooms. Hyen told him there were plenty of rooms, but doubted if any would meet his level. When he asked what she meant, pointing out that he had only asked for internet and hot water, she clarified that she wasn't talking about his standards but his situation. No landlord would rent to someone who couldn't guarantee payment. She criticized his bad attitude and added that the rooms he was searching for near the station were typically too nice for someone in his situation. Then she mentioned that it just so happened that a room near the station had become available. Coincidentally, A friend's younger brother had come looking for a room just like it. She admitted that it felt like things had aligned perfectly for Hyen, but expressed a personal wish that she hoped something would fall into place for herself too. She offered him a deal. If he agreed to help her with one thing, she would overlook his financial problems. Hyen had asked what kind of help she meant. She didn't explain much, only saying that there would be times when she'd need him to show up right away, and he'd have to be there. When he asked what she expected him to do, she said it was simply to keep her company. There were times things got on her nerves when she was alone. She handed him an agreement and explained that by accepting, he'd get to live in the room right across from the station just by doing that. She asked what he thought of that deal. Back in the present, Hyen explained to Subin that there wasn't any romantic relationship between him and the landlady. They just lived together. She was more like a boss who was often away, while he took care of the house in her absence. Subin looked away, and when he asked why, she said her neck felt stiff, pretending she had slept wrong. But internally, she was confused. She had assumed Hyen was at least his girlfriend, if not something more. So it surprised her that they weren't even in a relationship. She then commented that it must be because they had known each other for a long time. It explained the closeness. Hyen replied that he didn't speak in that way with her. Subin responded that maybe yoga didn't require that kind of closeness. He agreed, adding that you didn't necessarily have to be close with someone to do yoga together. Subin reflected on the conversation, feeling puzzled. She wondered if everyone really lived with such strange mindsets, or if she was the only one in her own world. Then she remarked sarcastically that Hyen must have nothing to worry about, given that he had a room and someone supporting him financially. Hyen replied curtly that yes. He supposed he was living a blessed life without worries. He asked if that was all, since everything she brought up seemed to have nothing to do with her. If so, he would be leaving. Subin quickly said no. She had one more thing to ask. She questioned herself internally, wondering if he was angry with her. She couldn't understand why things were playing out so differently from the internet stories she had read. Wasn't he supposed to fall for her now that she dressed casually and comfortably? Shouldn't it be easy for someone who looked like her? Finally, she gathered herself and asked him directly since he currently didn't have a girlfriend and mentioned that yoga didn't require closeness. Could he do yoga sessions with her too? Even if they hadn't known each other for long? That was what she really wanted to ask. And to be more specific, she wondered if it was also possible with a new tenant that he, as building manager, had just run into. She quickly added that she didn't mean it in a weird way and was simply curious. Hyen stared at her for a moment, then told her he understood what she meant and assumed she wanted an answer right away. Subin began to panic internally, wondering how she could prepare herself in such a short time for a one-on-one hit session. During the yoga session, Hyen commented that she had a nice body and asked if she worked to maintain it. She replied that it wasn't something she did consciously, it was probably just good genetics. Hyen responded that he would decide whether to believe that after making a few more observations. Subin remarked that he was teaching her so fast, and as they continued the session, she began thinking to herself none of this had been what she planned. Everything was happening so suddenly. During the gaming session, Hyen looked at Subin and asked whether she was getting nervous. He pointed out that this was what she had been curious about all along, so what was the big deal now? He reminded her that he was only teaching her this session to satisfy her curiosity, so he didn't understand why she seemed so anxious. He told her there was no need to be so tense and reassured her that she was probably feeling more relaxed now, thanks to his guidance. He then added that they were going to proceed with the session, and it was time to clear away the confusion. He glanced at her more seriously and asked whether she was truly curious or simply not interested. He told her to choose one and stick with it, because from the very beginning he had been ready. He questioned why she was now hesitating or trying to back out and said he was still waiting for her answer. Why wasn't she saying anything? Subin replied that she didn't think they would be doing the session so soon. Hyen raised an eyebrow and asked whether she hadn't known that the gaming session was part of this. Then, with a smirk, he pointed to something peeking out from her pocket and questioned her about it. He asked what it was. Wasn't the session's training or educational tool? Subin looked confused and hesitantly claimed that she didn't know what it could be. Hyen responded that she didn't have to pretend to be clueless anymore. He asked how she explained the item in her pocket, especially when it was clearly the training tool for the session. He couldn't understand why she was still trying to act so quiet and innocent when they had come this far. He warned her not to suddenly tell him she was feeling embarrassed now. Subin quickly said it wasn't like that. Hyen, catching the implication, gave a satisfied nod and said that meant she was going to proceed with the session with him after all, right? Hyen smirked and remarked that Subin had such a great reaction even if she hadn't planned it that way. He still intended to go all the way with the session. He said he was genuinely curious as to where she had learned to be so irresistibly cute. Subin responded earnestly, saying that no one had ever taught her anything. Hyen looked surprised and asked what she meant. She clarified that no one had ever guided her through a yoga session or anything of the sort before. She wondered aloud if he had assumed she had been acting the entire time. With a shaky voice, she added that it was hard for her even to breathe properly at that moment. Every time he gave her those intense instructions, it felt as though her lungs were being squashed. Hyen, clearly flustered, muttered that everything about her, including what she had just said, was driving him insane. Subin frowned and asked him what he was even talking about. He replied that she had practically passed out, even though they hadn't done that much exercise, and questioned if they weren't going to continue. He expressed his frustration, saying he wasn't finished with the session yet. Subin, breathing heavily, admitted that she couldn't go on any longer. She claimed she was done, that she felt like she was dying, and that the pain from the intense exercise was still lingering in her body. Hyen, clearly confused, questioned why she was the one complaining when it was she who had insisted they perform the yoga session in the first place. He pointed out that he had done all the work, yet she was acting as if she were the one who had exhausted herself. She snapped back at him, asking if she wasn't even allowed to complain. Her stomach was aching and cramped, she explained, and it was her first time doing such an exercise. She questioned whether being a trainer in an exercise session was truly something to be proud of. Hyen stood speechless for a moment, then expressed genuine surprise upon learning that it was Subin's first time doing such physical activity. He said he had assumed she was experienced since she had accepted everything so naturally. Subin, growing more frustrated, told him that he had to stop, especially with all the pushing and insistence. It was all too much. She was simply too tired. Hyen quickly defended himself, insisting that he had never forced her to do anything. Then, suddenly, his eyes landed on something else entirely. He turned toward the kitchen area and noticed a heap of trash bags. Walking over, he began counting them, more than 10 in total, all shoved under the sink. He turned back to Subin and asked if she never cleaned the trash. Subin looked startled and on the defensive. She explained that she was incredibly busy with work. Even though she worked from home, her schedule was so overwhelming that it consumed all of her time. She reminded him that while he was the building manager, she was still the tenant renting the apartment, and she didn't think it was his place to interfere in her personal matters. Hyen raised an eyebrow and remarked sarcastically that the mold on the pipes had started to resemble modern art. He warned her that if she wanted to get sick from contaminated water, then it was indeed perfect. Narrowing his gaze, he asked her to repeat what she had just said. Claiming he hadn't heard it properly the first time, he confirmed that she had said it wasn't his place to interfere. Without saying another word, Hyen began putting on gloves and declared that he would clean up all her trash. He added that today, he was officially giving her a lesson in living tips. He explained that mold could travel through light fixtures and walls, spreading to other rooms, houses, and corridors. He scolded her for being so consumed with work that she hadn't even thought to clean the place once. He wondered aloud how much worse it would have gotten by tomorrow if he hadn't discovered it today. Subin looked utterly humiliated and avoided eye contact. Hyen continued, saying he had encountered his fair share of people who didn't clean, but she really surpassed all of them. He asked if she cleaned regularly or simply happened to be present whenever the trash piled up. Either way, he said, she had clearly delayed cleaning far too long. He announced that they were going downstairs to throw it all out immediately and ordered her to follow him. He started carrying the trash bags and walked down the stairs without waiting for her response. Subin followed behind, her tone confused and almost pleading. She asked why he was cleaning her apartment when she was the one living there. Hyen reminded her calmly that, apart from being a training coach in her eyes, he was also the building manager. He said he'd take her letting him clean as her acknowledgement of his actual role in the building. He asked if that worked for her. Subin hesitated, then muttered, "Okay," accepting his terms, and they both began walking toward the entrance. Just as they reached the front door, the doorbell rang. Hansol turned to her and asked if she was expecting someone at that hour. Subin shook her head and replied that she wasn't. Hansol told her that they had to go outside anyway, so she should just open the door. Subin approached the door cautiously and asked who was there. The voice on the other side turned out to be Sasha, who announced loudly that she was now wide awake and didn't know what to do. Sasha explained that she had to head to her part-time job and was busy today, so sleeping wasn't an option anymore. She scolded Subin, asking why she had made so much noise when she had been asked to stay quiet during the day. Subin replied defensively that it was normal to be loud during the daytime. Hansol, watching the exchange unfold, grew increasingly curious. He looked at the woman standing outside and thought to himself that she must be a foreigner. There was something unique about her that immediately caught his attention. Sasha's gaze then shifted directly to Hansol. There was a brief moment of intense eye contact between the two of them. She then suddenly asked Subin if he was her ex-husband. Subin's face turned red, and she exclaimed in disbelief, asking Sasha what nonsense she was talking about. Even Hansol looked irritated by the sudden accusation. Sasha shrugged casually and said she had assumed as much because it sounded like the two of them had just been doing yoga together. Then she turned to Hansol with a gleam in her eyes, complimented his looks, and confirmed with Subin again whether he was really not her ex-husband. Without waiting for a response, Sasha then turned back to Hansol and, with a playful tone, asked whether he would like to do the exercise with her instead and cheekily asked if he wanted to become her husband. Subin, horrified by her friend's behavior, screamed Sasha's name and demanded to know what on earth she was saying. Meanwhile, Hansol, completely thrown off, was left wondering what was wrong with Sasha. Why was she saying such outrageous things? And more bafflingly, why was she asking him to be her husband? Hansol was standing there, holding all the trash bags, and looking directly at Sasha. He asked her what all of it was and who she was, questioning what she was doing there. Sasha responded casually, mentioning that she lived in Unit 302. Subin, startled by the sudden claim, began to interject, but before she could continue, Hansol interrupted and clarified that there seemed to be a misunderstanding. He explained to Sasha that he was just the building manager. Sasha appeared genuinely surprised, asking if he really was the building manager and expressing disbelief that the building had one. She then began piecing together what she had heard earlier, wondering aloud if it meant something was happening between the building manager and a new tenant. Hansol calmly denied the assumption, clarifying that there was nothing like that going on. He said the noise she heard was merely from cleaning, and that Subin had asked him for help, as there had been quite a bit to deal with. Sasha found that impressive and expressed how great it was that even the building manager helped with things like that. She then asked if she could request the same favor in the future. Hansol agreed politely, saying she could ask for help anytime. Internally, however, he found himself confused, thinking that he had never truly been a building manager and didn't know if tasks like these were normally expected. Sasha seemed pleased and said she would let him know when she needed assistance. She added that she had initially come to complain, but now she was glad she had. She remarked that it had turned into a nice conversation. Turning to Subin, she teased that Subin should have informed her earlier if someone like Hansol was around. She reminded them again that since she usually slept during the day, they should try to avoid intense cleaning at that time. With that, she said her goodbyes and left, closing the door behind her. Subin, relieved, commented that at least they had gotten away with it. Hansol, puzzled by her words, asked what she meant by that and if they truly had gotten away with something. Subin brushed it off and told him to forget it. The two of them then headed downstairs to dispose of the trash. After dumping the last of it, Hansol looked at the bags and remarked that it was finally over. He expressed his amazement at how many trash bags had been in Subin's apartment. Subin told him to stop talking about it, saying that it was all cleaned up now and everything was fine. Hansol agreed and took off his gloves, handing them to Subin while instructing her to hang them up somewhere to dry. He commented that he now finally knew her name and asked if he should call her Subin from now on. Subin, still a bit annoyed, told him to do whatever he pleased and then asked for his name. Hansol introduced himself as Hansol and requested that she stop calling him you from now on and instead use his name. He added that if she ever wanted to ask him for a favor again, like she did today, she was more than welcome to. Subin looked irritated and told him to forget about that, insisting that she would never ask for something like that again. Hansol chuckled and pointed out that she made it sound like he had forced her into doing it. He reminded her that the only reason he did it was because someone had asked him to. He stated confidently that there was no chance of that happening again and then walked off. As he stepped away, he thought to himself that the interaction had actually been somewhat fun. He figured it should be enough to set her straight and was certain that she wouldn't get on his nerves anymore. After getting a proper look at her, he also noted inwardly that, despite her attitude, she was actually a pretty cute girl. Subin returned to her room, still clutching her stomach, which continued to hurt from the earlier yoga session. Meanwhile, Hansol returned to his own apartment. He resumed cleaning and picked up his phone, asking the person on the line if they had arrived safely. He was on a call with Hyen. Hyen replied that she hadn't reached yet. Hansol remarked that it was already late at night and asked what was taking so long. Hyen responded that it wasn't anything serious. She admitted she had been stalling with excuses like traffic being worse than expected or having work to do. She explained that, as he already knew, she didn't really like going home. Hansol replied that he understood, noting that she was worse than he was in that regard. Hyen laughed and admitted that being compared to him was making her realize just how messed up she really was. Changing the subject, Hansol told her that he had something to ask. He wanted to know if the building manager's role only included managing the building itself. Hyen asked him to clarify what he meant. He explained that he was curious about how to deal with new tenants, as it was clear one of them wasn't exactly normal. Hyen explained that landlords didn't really have much authority over what tenants did. She said that all they could do was ask for rent on time and instruct them not to do anything dangerous inside the house. If they went beyond that, tenants might throw a fit and accuse them of invading their privacy. Hansol wondered to himself if that meant what he had done earlier couldn't really be considered part of his responsibilities as a building manager. Hyen reassured him again that the role was just a label she had given him for convenience. She reminded him that there were no actual responsibilities required of him. She said she had given him that title to make things easier, especially since he hadn't been able to settle down anywhere else. She told him not to overthink it and to just relax. That was all he needed to know. She added that she still had a long journey ahead and would call him back later because she was bored. Hansol teased her, saying it was because she was deliberately taking the long route. Suddenly, there was a knock at his door. Hansol told her to wait a second, as someone was at the door. He walked over and asked who it was. Standing there was Subin. Hansol asked what had brought her to his place. Subin admitted that what she was about to say might sound weird, especially considering the way they had parted earlier, but she had something she needed to tell him. She asked if she could come inside. Unbeknownst to either of them, a surveillance camera had been installed inside Hansel's room. From the other end of the phone, Hyen was able to see everything happening in real time, watching silently as the scene continued to unfold inside his apartment. Subin sat on the edge of her bed, the dim light of her room casting long shadows against the wall. Her mind replayed everything that had happened earlier, like a vivid montage. She clasped her knees and buried her face for a moment, then looked up again with a small, triumphant grin. She had finally gone through with a full training session with Hansol, a guy with a solid, well-toned body and a surprisingly decent face. He wasn't just anyone either. He was the one living with the landlady, the very same woman who had been looking down on her since day one. In her mind, it felt like a small victory, a silent payback, as if she had gotten the upper hand for once. She thought to herself that Hyen had underestimated her, and now she had taken a taste of what hers was. Subin chuckled quietly, letting the satisfaction wash over her. She thought that Hansol really was something. The session had been far more intense than she expected, more challenging, more exhausting. She had seen people casually doing yoga or playing a game on TV or in online videos, and she used to wonder how difficult it could possibly be. Now she knows. Her muscles still ached slightly from the jumping training, but it was oddly satisfying. And yet, a strange question surfaced in her mind. Would he do it again if I asked? The thought lingered, tempting her curiosity. But almost immediately, she scolded herself. Not that I want to, of course. It's not like I'm addicted to it or something. It's not like I'm obsessed. Still, the thought wouldn't leave. She remembered how he had casually said she could let him know if she ever wanted to work out again. It should have been easy to ask. But how could she? What if he thought she was desperate or clingy? Her thoughts wandered further. She told herself that even if she ever brought it up, she would probably beat around the bush first. There was no way she could just come out and say it, not with her pride on the line. Meanwhile, Han-sol looked at her with a raised eyebrow and asked if she had come over simply because she had no clothes and needed to borrow some. Subin, a little embarrassed, confirmed that yes. Her clothes had somehow gotten mixed up in the mountain of trash bags they had thrown out earlier. She suspected the one bag that contained just her clothes was among them. Han-sol shook his head in disbelief. He asked, almost sarcastically, who even stored their clothes like that in the first place. Subin didn't back down. She replied that while it might sound strange, didn't he think she was the kind of person capable of doing something that chaotic? Han-sol sighed and reminded her that it had only been a few hours since he had told her to be upfront if she ever wanted another yoga class. Subin quickly jumped in to clarify, saying that wasn't what she had meant at all, and that he was completely misunderstanding the situation. He shrugged and told her that if that was the case, then fine, but he could read her expression easily. He pointed out that she was wearing a nearly see-through white shirt, making it look like she had rushed up here with a specific goal in mind. Her body language, her tone, everything seemed to scream that she wanted another session. Why else would she come up dressed like that? Subin clenched her fists. She was getting annoyed now. She firmly stated that her clothes were gone, and she didn't have anything else to wear. That was the only reason she had shown up like this. She reminded him that he was the one living with the landlady, which made him the only one she could go to. She asked if he really thought she was that kind of girl. Then she narrowed her eyes and said he was the one sounding desperate right now. Not her. Han-sol crossed his arms and gave her a long look. He told her to cut the lectures and just be honest. Then he sighed, turning toward his closet. He told her he had a few clothes she could borrow, nothing fancy, but they would do. He handed them to her, telling her to take them and leave right after. He was in the middle of cleaning and didn't have time for drama. Subin hesitated. She glanced down at the clothes in her hands, then looked up again. Her voice softened just a little as she asked him hypothetically if she had wanted another yoga session. Would he really have agreed to go along with it? Han-sol paused, then turned to look at her, a hint of amusement on his face. He told her frankly that, since she was kind of cute, of course he would have gone along with it. And then, softening his tone just slightly, he added that if she was planning to stay a bit longer, she might as well have something to eat before leaving. There was no point being stubborn on an empty stomach. Later that evening, Han-sol was in his room doing resistance training. The steady rhythm of his breathing matched the soft thuds of his movements. He paused for a moment, wiped sweat from his forehead, and glanced at his phone. It was late. He wondered aloud if he should just make some ramen. He remembered there were a few bags left in the cupboard. Looking across the room at Subin, he smiled and said she was learning fast. Her form had improved. Her focus was impressive. Then, as he wiped his neck with a towel, he teased her again, asking if she had planned this whole thing from the very start. Maybe this had been her scheme all along. He looked back at his phone and noticed a message pop up. It was from Hyen. The message was short, but filled with quiet emotion. I'm almost home. Can you come down to the first floor and hug me? Han-sol stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. A mix of fatigue and surprise passed over his features. He stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of that request settle in. Outside, the night was silent, but inside, everything seemed to stir with unresolved tension. Subin lay on the bed in Hansel's room, her body heavy with sleepiness. As she struggled to lift herself up, her eyes caught the door, which stood slightly ajar. A wave of confusion swept over her as she tried to piece together what had happened. She found herself wondering when exactly she had fallen asleep in his room. Her last memory was of the yoga session they had started together, right there. She noticed the light in the living room was still on and began to question whether Han-sol had gone out. Though curiosity tugged at her, fatigue weighed heavier. Her stomach hurt, and she felt utterly drained. She reasoned that he probably wouldn't mind if she stayed and rested a little longer. But then another thought struck her. If they continued like this, what exactly would that make them? She found herself pondering their relationship. Was it simply that of yoga partners? Or was this something more? After all, today marked day one of being a couple, at least. That's what it seemed like. Meanwhile, Han Sol had stepped outside, where Hyen was already waiting for him inside her car. He asked if it was all right for her to have returned so soon. Hyen responded with a question of her own, asking if he had been busy doing something. Han Sol denied it, explaining that he had assumed she would stay overnight at her parents' place since they lived far away. Her return at such an odd hour suggested something was off. Hyen admitted she had come back on purpose. Her parents, she explained, had been too overbearing lately and she didn't want to spend more time with them than necessary. Just seeing their faces, she said, was enough. Han Sol looked confused and asked what she meant. She explained that her parents never really called for anything serious, they simply wanted to see if she would respond when summoned. That was their way of pestering her. Han Sol remarked that her family sounded rather troublesome. Hyen brushed off the comment, saying that family was tough no matter what. Still, the fact that Han Sol came out when she called made her feel a little better. She then suggested they go upstairs and asked for a hug. Han Sol, avoiding the request, proposed that since they were already outside, they could book a room to continue their usual exercise. Hyen questioned why she would get a room when she already had a place of her own. Han Sol hesitated, saying he just wanted to take a breather since he'd spent the entire day cleaning. Hyen gave him a sharp look and asked if he was trying to hide the girl currently inside the house. Hansel's reaction was one of visible shock. Hyen noted his blank stare and told him plainly that his expression didn't change anything. She urged him to take her inside and promised to listen to everything start to finish once they got a room. Eventually, the two agreed to head to a motel for their usual cardio session. During the workout, Hyen brought up Subin, the eccentric girl from Unit 301. She asked if he had been gentle while teaching her, adding that with Hansel's personality, she could easily picture him doing exactly that. Han Sol immediately denied the accusation, insisting that Hyen had misunderstood. But Hyen wasn't finished. She told him to go ahead and do whatever made him feel better, sarcastically acknowledging his pride. However, she knew he wasn't the type to let things slide easily either. She pointed out that he seemed unaware of his own habits, particularly his tendency to stay silent when something bothered him. Rather than speaking up, he bottled everything inside, and then when already frustrated by something else, he would let all those repressed emotions explode. She pressed him to confess what had upset him, especially with his mother, and guessed that he must have had a serious confrontation with her at her house. Han Sol admitted that she was right, asking, "So what?" He then recalled how she had once told him that being an adult meant enduring all the things one disliked. And yet here he was, a freeloader living under her roof, carrying only the title of building manager. In reality, he was unemployed and the landlord was keeping him around solely for their regular workouts. Han Sol wondered aloud what else he could say to that. They weren't officially dating, nor were they married. There was technically no reason why he couldn't be with another girl. So why, he asked, was it such a problem? Hyen made it clear there was definitely a problem. Both Han Sol and the house, she said, belonged to her. If she found out someone else had been using what was hers however they pleased, how could she not react? She reminded him that the real issue was his taking her for granted, acting rudely just because she had shown him kindness. That, she said, was the root of everything. If he had something to say, she urged him to say it now. Han Sol remained lying there, his mind caught in a tangle of thoughts. He silently questioned her declaration, wondering why exactly he belonged to her. It was a question he wanted to ask out loud but refrained from, realizing that much of what she said wasn't entirely wrong either. In the end, he told her he wouldn't do it again. Hyen remarked that it was something he should have never done in the first place. Then she asked what he thought he needed to do now if he truly wanted to resolve things like a grown man. Given the stress she had endured going back and forth between her home and his that day, she said she'd really appreciate a hug. She encouraged him to just focus on being a good man. Hansel's thoughts drifted again. There was something about Hyen that constantly irritated him, her arrogance, her intensity, but what truly bothered him was that he himself was a pathetic man, dependent on others for everything. Even over something as insignificant as a $100 misunderstanding, he had triggered unnecessary drama. He knew that sooner or later Hyen would find out he had training with another girl. And he couldn't help but wonder when, if ever, he would finally be able to grow up and become a real man. Back at the house, Subin lay on the bed, her mind quietly questioning where Han Sol had gone. Han Sol lay snorting softly on the bed, clearly reluctant to leave the warmth of his sleep. Just then, Hyen approached him and called out, telling him it was time to wake up. She reminded him of the time it was already 10 o'clock and mentioned that she was heading out, urging him to get up. Hansol slowly sat up, his mind still hazy, and brought up something that had been lingering in his thoughts. He recalled how she had said he belonged to her and questioned whether making such a claim was what truly made someone a grown-up. Hyen responded with a trace of sarcasm, noting how obedient he was now and adding that if only he were always like this, things would be easier. She told him that next time he had something to complain about, he should try acting like an adult by communicating it properly rather than stirring up trouble and making a scene. She asked if he could do better from now on. Hansol looked at her, assuring her that he had already said he would. Satisfied, she nodded and said she was heading out since she still had some matters to take care of at home. Hansol asked whether things weren't already settled, considering she had gone to visit her parents. She replied that while things had calmed down for the most part, she still had a few tedious tasks left to handle. As she moved about, he looked at her and questioned if it was all right for her to be wearing the same clothes as the previous day. She replied that she planned to stop by her office and pick up the clothes she had left there. If she was careless like someone else had been, she remarked pointedly, everything she had done the night before might be exposed. Hyen added that she wouldn't be able to drive him home that day but reassured him that it shouldn't be a problem since his place was nearby. Hansol responded casually, telling her not to worry, he wasn't a child after all. She gave a half-smile and commented that for someone who claimed not to be a child, her son certainly had a knack for playing with fire. Hansol, trying to sound sincere, told her he understood, reiterating that what happened would never occur again. He asked what more he needed to do to make her believe him. She told him it all depended on his behavior moving forward. If his actions could be as mature as his so-called magic rod, then maybe, just maybe, she'd be willing to forgive him. But she made it clear she would be watching, so he had better behave. After Hyen left, Hansol headed out and caught a bus. As he sat there, he glanced around and noticed that the bus was nearly empty at that hour. The quietness triggered a stream of memories. It had been quite a while since he had taken a bus home at this time of day. He tried to recall the last time he had done something like this. His thoughts drifted back to the time when he had been fired from his first job shortly after moving out on his own. Back then, he had gotten worked up over something again, ended up getting kicked out, and used what little money he had left to drown his sorrows. It struck him now as a revelation how recklessly he had been living his life. Not that he had changed much, he thought wryly. Lost in his reflection, he barely noticed when someone boarded the bus. A woman stepped inside, swiped her card, and stood nearby. She was thinking to herself whether her life would get any better from that point forward. It was Sasha. Hansol turned to look at her, and it took him a moment to recognize her face. He remembered that she was the foreigner he had encountered once before in the corridor. She looked just like he remembered. Sasha's eyes lit up in surprise as she saw him, and without hesitation, she exclaimed loudly, calling him manager guy. She remarked at how strange it was to run into him again. Greeting him cheerfully, she asked why he was out at that hour. Was it for work or something else? Hansol replied simply that he had some errands to run. She tilted her head and asked if he was now on his way back home. As Hansol stepped into the house, Subin was already standing there, waiting for him. Without hesitation, she punched him hard, her face contorted in anger. She began scolding him immediately, saying she had been wondering where he had gone after he had disappeared so suddenly. To her shock, it turned out he had spent all that time working out with another girl while someone else herself had been waiting alone in a dark room, feeling like a complete fool. She demanded to know what kind of behavior that was, clearly furious at the indifference he had shown. Hansol winced in pain as he tried to get up from the floor. He groaned, saying that her punch had really hurt. If she had been a man, he would have hit back without thinking. He then asked how messed up someone had to be to throw a punch the very moment they saw someone. Subin, still fuming, sarcastically pointed out that he was actually calling her character into question in a situation like this. Before their argument could escalate further, Sasha walked into the room. Trying to lighten the mood, Sasha told Subin not to get so worked up, warning that she might scare the building manager. Subin, however, wasn't having it. She snapped back, asking if she was supposed to just smile and pretend everything was fine. Her gaze sharpened as she questioned Sasha on how she had ended up arriving with Hansol. Sasha quickly explained that it had just been a coincidence they had run into each other on the bus after work and simply walked back from the bus stop together. But Subin pressed on, questioning why Sasha had been practically glued to him on the way home. Just as Sasha was about to defend herself, Hansol cut in. He had been listening quietly and now looked directly at Subin. He asked her what exactly was going on. Were they dating now? When had they even become a couple? Subin looked taken aback, stumbling over her words as she tried to respond. She admitted that they had never explicitly said it, but before she could finish, Han Sol interrupted again. He reminded her that they had never mentioned anything about being together, so she had no right to question him or hit him. He told her bluntly that she was just a girl to him, nothing more. Her face tightened, but she stepped closer to him, asking him quietly if she really looked like just a girl to him. She reminded him about what had happened the previous day, the happiness they had shared, the long cardio session, the moments they had spent together. She asked if it wasn't strange for him to now say she meant nothing. Han Sol replied coldly that there was nothing strange about it. All he had done was show her what kind of person he was since she had been so curious. That didn't automatically mean they were in a relationship. He brushed off her feelings, calling them a bizarre misunderstanding. Summoning her courage, Subin asked him directly if she meant nothing to him, then what was his relationship with that other woman? Han Sol was stunned for a moment, a memory flashing back to him, Hyen's words echoing in his mind. She had told him that from now on he needed to remember one thing: there would be times when she would be looking for him and he needed to show up whenever she did. Trying to stay composed, he told Subin that he was pretty sure he had mentioned it before. When Hyen called him, he had to go to her and do what she asked. Subin asked if that included the night before. Han Sol confirmed that it did. He explained that she had asked for him, so he went. Then he looked at Subin and asked what the problem was. Why did it matter to her what he did or when he came home? He told her that if she understood what he meant, then she should stop questioning him altogether. But Subin, shaking with rage and hurt, punched him again. Her voice cracked as she shouted that she had heard him loud and clear and that he shouldn't bother speaking to her ever again. She called him a piece of garbage, her eyes welling up with tears, and then she ran off toward her apartment, sobbing. Han Sol clutched the spot where she had hit him, clearly furious, and muttered under his breath, asking what was wrong with that girl. Sasha, who had witnessed the entire exchange, stepped closer. Han Sol looked at her suspiciously and asked what she was doing. Sasha explained that things were getting too serious, so she had poked him earlier to lighten the mood. Han Sol glared at her, accusing her of causing the misunderstanding that led to him getting beaten up. Sasha apologized, saying she hadn't expected things to blow up to this extent. She added that Subin must really like him. Han Sol scoffed at the idea and said that if she still liked him, she'd probably strangle him the next time she saw him. In her eyes, he was now nothing more than garbage. Sasha pointed out that she had heard he'd had a private training with Subin in her apartment. That had to mean they were close, didn't it? Han Sol dismissed the notion, arguing that it was possible to have cardio and training sessions with someone even without any romantic feelings involved. Sasha, however, reminded him that Subin was a very innocent girl. She cared about those kinds of things deeply. Han Sol asked sarcastically if that meant he wasn't even allowed to be angry now just so he wouldn't tarnish her pure heart. She clarified that it wasn't about that. Instead, she turned the question on him. Didn't he like Subin? She said his face gave everything away. He was the type to only sleep with someone he genuinely liked. Han Sol got defensive, snapping that she was talking as if she knew everything about him. Sasha calmly said that her experience working with customers had taught her a lot about reading people's faces, and from what she had seen, Han Sol was like a child in a good way. He seemed like an innocent person, not unlike Subin. That remark about being a child hit a nerve. Han Sol snapped at her to stop with the face-reading nonsense and said he didn't believe in it anyway. Sasha noted to herself that he looked furious now. Deciding not to push him any further, she quietly said she was leaving. She pressed the door and stepped out. Han Sol stood alone in the silence, feeling more isolated than ever. He wondered how it was possible that not a single person in the building seemed to understand him. Meanwhile, Subin had locked herself in her room. Tears streamed down her face as she muttered bitterly to herself, calling Han Sol a piece of garbage. She couldn't believe how he had spoken to her. She questioned what she had said that was so wrong. She had genuinely been into him, and he was the one who had called her cute, the one who had made her feel special. Was it really so wrong for her to believe that she had become important to him? She fumed at the thought that he saw no difference between her and that other woman, both of whom he had shared wrestling sessions with. In her imagination, she saw Hyen standing in front of her, taunting her. The imagined Hyen told her that between her and Subin there was no comparison. She said she knew Han Sol well, the very man Subin had just called garbage. She reminded Subin that she was the one who had given him a home and money. Then she asked what Subin had ever done for him other than ask to be taught some exercises. The imaginary Hyen scoffed and told Subin that if she could get a house and money with that innocence of hers, she deserved credit. But reality didn't work like that. She asked Subin if she had more money than she did or if she even had her own home. She mocked her further, questioning if Subin at least had bigger headlights than she did. And finally, she sneered and said that it was obvious Subin was nothing to Han Sol. She was just someone trying to take what belonged to others, and if she dared to try more than that, she was only setting herself up to be spit out from now on. Sasha confronted Han Sol directly, asking him if he was finally going to give her an answer today whether he would marry her or not. She mentioned how there had been an increasing trend of scams exploiting family or marital ties, often involving fake marriage proposals or manipulative role-playing schemes. These cases were now common topics on television and in the news. Han Sol stood there frozen, completely stunned by her question. Without a moment's hesitation, he told her coldly to get out. Sasha was taken aback, asking why he was suddenly telling her to leave. Han Sol snapped back, asking why she was even questioning it. He asked what made her think he would agree to marry someone he barely even knew. But Sasha insisted it wasn't a big deal. Couldn't they just start getting to know each other from now on? Han Sol stared at her incredulously and said she had lost her mind. He told her to forget it and go back home. Sasha, clearly hurt, reminded him that he was the one who had once told her she could come to him if she ever had problems. But Han Sol pushed her gently toward the door, saying that wasn't what he meant and she knew it. He accused her of twisting his words. She accused him in return, asking if he was trying to deceive her just because she looked naive. Han Sol scoffed and said he already knew she was only pretending to be dumb. Then Sasha muttered something under her breath, mentioning how Subin had gotten a little extra service while getting her house cleaned, that it had just sort of happened. Han Sol ignored her tone and said that regardless of what had happened, he had no plans to do anything further for Subin. He added that Subin had shown her true colors earlier, wasting his time with pointless accusations and outbursts. Sasha didn't seem convinced. She stared at him and said it didn't seem that way at all. She believed he hadn't meant a single word of what he had just said. Han Sol snapped, telling her she had gone mad. He asked what it had to do with him, sarcastically brushing off her assumptions. But Sasha continued, saying that his face gave everything away. Even though he claimed to be done with Subin, there was still a sliver of doubt lingering inside him. Subin was clearly still on his mind. Han Sol warned her once again not to assume things. Sasha grinned faintly, saying that she was pretty good at guessing. Han Sol rolled his eyes and told her to stop with the face-reading nonsense. He didn't buy it and had had enough. He told her it was time to leave his house. Just as she reached the door, Sasha turned back around and said she had one more thing to ask. Han Sol, already fed up, replied flatly that he had already told her he wasn't going to marry her. She accepted that and said fine, they could leave the marriage talk aside. But if it was something else entirely, would he at least say yes? He was already pushing her toward the door, but Sasha begged him to hear her out just one last time. She promised that if he agreed to this one request, she wouldn't bother him again. With a sigh, Han Sol asked what kind of ridiculous request she was about to make this time. She looked at him sincerely and asked if he could ring her doorbell at 7 a.m. to wake her up. She had a part-time job to attend to and she didn't trust herself to wake up on her own. She pleaded with him to do it just once. If he did, she swore she wouldn't cause him any more trouble after that. She asked what he thought. Han Sol stood frozen for a moment, staring at her in disbelief. That was all she wanted from him? She nodded and explained that she didn't want to fall asleep at work again like she had today. She asked him to just stay at her door until she woke up and that she would be counting on him. He stared at her, completely baffled, and muttered under his breath, wondering why she was being so stubborn. As he stood there in silence, a wave of conflicting thoughts passed through his mind. He felt like this building never failed to surprise him. Every day brought something more absurd. Just waking up as an adult still felt unreal, yet here he was, being asked to marry someone out of the blue. And now, after all that drama, she was requesting something completely ridiculous. Still, somehow, the way she had phrased it turned the moment into some kind of strange agreement. He couldn't help but feel as if he'd just been scammed. As he made his way upstairs toward his apartment, he passed Unit 301 Subin's place. He stopped for a second, glaring at the door. He scoffed internally, wondering how she could possibly believe that he still had feelings for her. For someone who jumped to conclusions and carelessly hurled criticism, the idea that he was still emotionally invested in her was laughable. He told himself that he preferred to stay away from someone so unpredictable. What on earth had made her think otherwise? Shaking his head, he finally arrived at Unit 302. He rang the doorbell and waited, but there was no response from inside. Growing concerned, he wondered what had happened. Subin entered Sasha's apartment, her expression unreadable. Sasha looked at her curiously and asked why she seemed upset and silent. Subin, in turn, asked if something had happened to her. Sasha, caught off guard, questioned what she meant by that. Was something going on? Subin clarified that it was nothing like that. She had just seen Sasha's door slam shut. Sasha appeared flustered and quickly apologized. She explained that she had stepped outside to retrieve a package but had rushed back in because she had been in a hurry. Subin looked surprised and then asked, with disbelief, why Sasha wasn't wearing any proper clothes at that moment. Sasha awkwardly admitted that it was because the package contained something a bit embarrassing to show to others. Meanwhile, Han was inside Sasha's apartment, attempting to stay out of sight and overhearing their entire conversation. He couldn't help but think how absurd the situation was. There he was, hiding, while Sasha still chose to answer the door like that. He wondered if most people wouldn't be more embarrassed about being poorly dressed rather than the contents of a package. Sasha then pointed out to Subin that the towel she was wearing was covering all necessary parts of her body. Subin dismissed the comment, telling her to drop the topic altogether. Sasha teasingly remarked that Subin was so conservative. Subin responded that she would be on her way since nothing serious had happened, but warned Sasha to be careful. Sasha then asked, half playful and half curious, if Subin was still worried about her. Subin paused and then turned to ask if Sasha running into Han earlier had really been a coincidence. Sasha, blinking in confusion, asked what she meant by that. She assured Subin it had been a mere coincidence, a completely random encounter from long ago. Then, with a sharp tone, she asked why Han was still on Subin's mind. Subin quickly dismissed it, saying she was just asking, and then walked away from the apartment. Sasha returned to her apartment where Han was still standing inside. She laughed and commented that both he and Subin were alike. Han frowned, telling her she needed to think before she spoke. Sasha smirked and accused him of staying quiet because he was afraid she would tell Subin he was there. She said it was because he didn't want Subin to know he had been in the same room with her while she was in such revealing clothing. Sasha suggested he knew Subin wouldn't be happy if she found out, and that was why he had chosen to hide. Han exasperated, yelled that anyone would act the way he did in a situation like that. Sasha responded sarcastically, saying it did look like the building manager was up to no good in a tenant's room. Han now frustrated, sarcastically agreed that's exactly what it looked like, and that's why he was afraid. She then asked if he didn't have anything to say to her since she had saved him from being discovered. He muttered an apology but added that she was the one who had fallen asleep with the door open.